All right, thank you. All right, well, it's 6 o'clock, so welcome everyone. And Molly, just to confirm, you can still hear me?
That's right, I can.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit new to this WebEx, but we want to welcome everybody. So if I make some goof ups tonight, Molly is here to help, as well as Courtney and Terry. So thank you for joining us. Tonight's topic is vegetable production tips and tricks. And our speaker tonight is Courtney Cheetah. Courtney is at the University of Minnesota. And Courtney will talk about several crops, everything from arugula to zucchini and most of the vegetables that we can grow in Minnesota. And she's going to discuss some of the tools and tips that they've used over the last 10 seasons at the Cornucopia Student Organic Farm, and that's right on the St. Paul campus. And just one housekeeping detail, if you look on the lower right-hand side of the screen, you can scroll down and find your name. And just to make sure, on the right-hand side, to make sure that your microphone is muted at this time, so it's quiet, so we don't hear any background noise. At some point, if you've got questions, there is a chat box on the lower right-hand side. You can either enter a question in the chat box, and if you have any problems accepting it, you can just hit the return key on your keyboard. After we're done, and whenever Courtney is ready, and she'll probably let us know that, but you can also unmute yourself and ask questions whenever Courtney would like, and she can tell us when she would like those questions. But that probably would be best to do at the end. Otherwise, it'll be a little confusing because we have a very nice crowd here tonight. So with that, I am going to mute myself, and I'm going to turn it over to Courtney.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jim. Well, let's get started. I think I actually counted it up, and we have about 115 crops that we're going to talk about into varying degrees tonight, so that's kind of exciting. So I'm from the Cornucopia Student Organic Farm, and we are an organic farm at the University of Minnesota that is really focused on providing students with hands-on whole farm learning opportunities, food for our local community, and a place for community building, multidisciplinary education, research, and outreach. And we are a student program of the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture. I have my contact information up there on the screen right now, and it'll be on the very last slide as well, but I just wanted to put that out there. And so I've worked with Jim a long time ago when he was on the MISA board, and I've been growing for the last 10 years with Cornucopia and trying to figure out how to grow everything that we can grow here in Minnesota. So we're going to jump in here. First thing I want to talk about is plants, planting, and successions. And so as you're thinking about planning your garden for this coming season or your farm, you might want to think about how you're going to start your plants. Are you going to use transplants, or are you going to direct seed them? Direct seeding has some definite pros, positive pieces to it, in that it's typically less expensive. You know, you have lots of different sources of seeds and really great varieties to choose from, because you can choose from whatever varieties of seeds you can find. The downsides of doing direct seeding would be that you sometimes don't know if seeds are going to germinate, if you're going to get a really good stand, if it's uniform or not. So you do, but those are things to consider if you're going to direct seed or transplant things. I want to actually, I have a bunch of these little videos that we can actually embed. I've got them in this presentation for you to look at. So we're going to look at a couple of those here. And so the first one I want to share with you is, I'm going to share this using a earthway seeder and show you what that looks like.
We're friends with Shared Legacy Farms. Jen and I are going to plant some sturgeon today. What we have here is a simple seedway seeder. It's a simple plate seeder. It's a dry
You can see this is so simple that, you know, like a 2-year-old is helping with it. But basically what it's doing is it's opening up a furrow, dropping the seeds down as the wheels turn, they're turning a mechanism, and then it's covering them up as well with a little chain behind it. Okay, that was good. Okay, I just want to come back and make sure that that worked. I don't see anybody chatting saying no, it didn't work, so that's good. So let me show you another one that's a 4-row cedar. I'm gonna jump ahead here.
You bought from Johnny's, of course, and Johnny's Selected Seeds. We got Anthony Stevenson here. You know, planting seeds can be difficult, but the 4-row pinpoint cedar makes it a breeze. And you're going to give us a little demonstration today. I am. All right. Tell us a little bit about this tool. Okay, this is called the 4-row pinpoint seed. And what it does is it enables you to plant 4 rows of varying space with pinpoint accuracy. Anthony, what type of seed would I use? This is ideal for planting small to mid-sized seeds. So things like lettuces, carrots, all those teeny tiny seeds that are hard to grab. Yeah. Dave, let me show you the features. There are 4 hoppers that you put the seeds into. Each hopper is 2 1/4 inches apart, so you can adjust your row spacing depending on which hopper you want. In the bottom of each hopper, there's a dimple. You would select the dimple that matches the seed size that you're using. Slide the shaft back and forth. Once you've done that, all these brushes are adjustable, and that will limit the amount of seeds that is actually dropping out, ideally 1 or 2. On the back of it, on the bottom, these are plows that make furrows that your seeds actually drop into. And does it cover it as well? No, that's the only thing you have to do. So it does most of the work for you. That's right. That's a great little tool. So Anthony, 1 row of 4, and then you just keep doing this? If you need more, yeah, best thing to actually do is to lay this wheel in the track. This wheel just makes it turn. Just keep going. Anthony, thanks for introducing us to the 4-row pin.
Okay, so that's the 4-row pinpoint cedar. There's also an additional jang cedar that is similar to the earthway cedar. Instead of having discs that you change out to drop the seeds into it, has rollers and a little bit different hopper, but it's very similar to the 4-row. It's more expensive than the earthway, but the earthway tends to, from what the experience that I've had, if you have any kind of bumpy soil, or if your soil isn't really nice and smooth with no rocks and no bumps, it can be difficult to get a nice clean row and good good planting of seeds and uniformity. The jang is a little bit more forgiving in that respect. So it kind of just depends on what your budget is. 1-row cedar can be like, I think, about $150. The jang cedar is more like $350. Both of those can be, you can put multiple of them together to plant more than 1 row at once, but then obviously you have to have multiple cedars. Sometimes it's easier to just go back and forth with 1. The 4-row cedar is more expensive. I want to say that's more in the like $400 to $500 range. But just to give you an idea of what is out there for direct seeding. Transplants, I tend to think that transplants you can get them going earlier because you can start them inside. They're going to be faster than seeds, just in that you can get them started. And you have an improved final stand in that you know that every plant that you put out there has been planted, and you're not waiting for seeds to germinate, and you don't know. It takes out some of that guesswork of, is it going to grow or not? It's going to cost more typically in that you're going to either have to have the materials to germinate them and grow the transplants inside in a greenhouse or under grow lamps, or you're going to have to buy the transplants compared to the seeds. There's usually less varietal selection if you're not starting your own seeds, just based on what's available out there at stores or from other places you could source transplants from. And you may have to protect them from an early season frost as well. There is a really cool tool that I want to show you that's called the Hatfield Transplanter that I absolutely love. It's just such a slick tool in terms of speeding up your planting process and just making it really easy. This tool is awesome. It takes 2 people to work. You can see one person's working the Hatfield Transplanter, basically pushing it down into the soil. The other person is popping the transplants into the little hopper there. They fall down. I usually typically like to have a 3rd person coming along and just tucking the plants in after the 2 people have done this, but it's super fast. I mean, you can plant lots and lots of plants really, really fast, which is nice. It's fast, it's easy, and I think the Hatfield Transplanter is less than $200. It's really, really reasonable and works really, really well for transplants, especially if transplants that are in a nice straight row like that, quick and easy. You can usually go ahead and lay out the first row, and then once you're got that first row, you can kind of just eyeball the 2nd row, 3rd row, 4th row as you go. So thinking about if you are going to do transplants, plug trays, a lot of people use plug trays. There's all different types and sizes. The thing that concerns me about plug trays is a lot of times when you're growing things can get really root bound in a plug tray. The example there, the kale seedling that just has roots wrapped around each other. If you try to put that in the ground, you're going to have to break it apart. It's going to sit there, and it's going to probably be a little bit stunted as you go. One of the best solutions, other options, I guess, before I get to my favorite solution, Jiffy pots. They can have an interesting challenge in that they're the little pellets that you get wet, they expand. They've got a soil medium or soilless media in there with a little net around it. What I've found is that those have a similar problem where those roots get all entangled in there, and those nets don't break down fast enough. And so you often are stuck with, you kind of have to tear the net apart, and then you disturb the roots, and it might not be much better than having them be really root bound in the plug trays. Compostable pots are another option. With those, they're not going to break down super fast in the soil, so sometimes you need to either, again, break those apart and take them off so that roots are free to get growing. If you do keep those pots in the ground, you want to make sure that the lip of it is covered with soil. This is really important because if you don't do that, the moisture that's down by the roots that you want to stay by the roots to water the plant and give the plant moisture are going to actually just wick up the sides of the pot and evaporate out off the top edge if that's not buried underneath the soil. So that's something to consider with the compostable pots. My favorite option is actually to use a soil block. Soil blocks are made with a special little tool. There's a picture of the tiniest one. I usually tend to use the 1 3/8 inch for most things. And I can give you a little quick video of what the soil block makers typically, what they're all about.
We're going to be making soil blocks today, a la Elliott Coleman. So first you have a soil block maker, and you either wash it out, rinse it off in water, then, whoops, okay, Crystal's showing us the bottom of that. Then you carry it over to your soil mix. This soil mix is compost, peat, and perlite, and it's been mixed up with a hoe in this bucket. Crystal's making the soil block maker go kind of side to side to get the soil blocks in there. Then she leans it over, takes a trowel, and cuts off the edges, or the bottom rather, so that it lays down evenly. Then she'll bring it over to a container here. And then up at the top, there's a release that she presses down and up. And then when you're all done, she lifts up, and there's a bunch of soil blocks all made. So the reason that these particular soil blocks have holes in the middle is that the peppers that we're planting planted earlier in those smaller soil blocks will fit right into, can you hold off for that? Will fit right into that space. Thanks. That's it.
So the soil block makers, they come in a bunch of different sizes. They are really pretty easy to use and make. You mix up a potting mix that's specially for soil blocks. You can get it. There's a bunch of companies that make them. Cow's Moo has one. Purple Cow has one. Or you can get the original Elliott Coleman ingredients out of the New Organic Grower to mix those up. What I really like about soil blocks is that because there's that little bit of air around all of the soil block, the roots tend to start, the seeds germinate, the roots start growing, and they hit that wall of air, and essentially they root prune, or they air prune themselves, and you end up getting a denser root ball that is not root bound. And so as soon as you get that plant into the ground, those roots all just kind of wake up and go, oh yeah, let's keep growing, there's more soil. And you end up with really healthy, happy transplants that don't have transplant shock for them, in my experience. So I really, really like the soil blocks. I think they're a really great investment. You can reuse the plastic trays that they are put in. It reduces your, how much plastic you end up using. It's just a really great option. I pretty much use soil blocks for everything that I'm transplanting except for tomatoes and maybe some of the cucurbits. The cucurbits, they're only in that pot for about 10 days as they're growing. And then the tomatoes look like a lot much taller, bigger soil block than I've been able to make hold together. So you also want to think about when you're starting plants, grid or row spacing. If you're going to do things in long rows, if you're going to do things in a grid, other options would include like a hexagonal biointensive method. Here you're planting basically things in triangles or octagonal or hexagonal shapes. And basically each plant has just enough room so at maturity it'll just barely touch and create like a CO2 envelope around the plant and makes it pretty healthy and happy. I think it's also important to think about succession planting in terms of if you're going to plant more than one thing in a space during the course of the season. So potentially having something like a crop of spinach come in early, then pulling that out, putting in lettuces, pulling out the lettuces once they're done, putting in radishes. You can do this with a lot of really short season crops. It can be pretty easy to do and it really maximizes your production. The way that I like to think about it is we have about 150 days between May 15th and October 15th. I know I realize that October 15th, sometimes we can get a frost before then. And if you're up north, you may have even shorter. But there are a number of crops that are really pretty fast. And some of them you can even transplant to get even a quicker growing season on. So that's something to think about and to plan ahead for. Another tool that I really, really like is the broad fork. I really think it's a great tool in terms of cultivation and prepping your beds ahead of time. There are a number of different ones available. I recently last year got a Meadow Creature one that I really like. And I'm just going to show you this. This is really what the broad fork does, is it works really well to aerate your soil and give your soil lots of opportunity to have airspace in it, to grow, and to just give room for the plants that they need, the roots to grow.
Using the Meadow Creature broad fork.
I set the broad fork in the ground, and the tines go into the soil, and I step onto the broad fork, and it pushes it down into the soil. I use the weight of my body. I don't try to jam it down. It goes down into the soil, and I let my body rest there. Then I step off of the fork, pull it up, and step back a pace, and do it all over again.
I like to place the tines into the ground, the handles vertical, and then I use my weight, either stepping onto the broad fork or hopping on it. Again, using my weight, I like to lean back with the tool to draw the fork back, and that props the soil up a bit for me.
A broad fork is a great tool for women to use. It's not a tool that you need to throw around or have a whole lot of upper body strength. don't feel like you have to jump on it or lift it up. It's really easy to like feel like you have to muscle it around and you don't need to let the tool do the work for you.
Meadowcreature.com, artisan farm.
Okay. So I like the broad fork for just aerating your soil instead of tilling it at the beginning of the season or in between crops as well. It just works really well for that purpose. It's really usable. I have found that men do tend to hop on it more than women. Women are more like, I don't know, that's maybe a generalization, but that is definitely something I've noticed, which is kind of funny. Yeah. So let us get into all those different fruits and vegetables that we are going to talk about today. I think it's really important to think about what crop families each vegetable belongs to. And so I've actually organized this presentation based on those different families. And it's really to help you with your rotation. Ideally a crop rotation are 2 crops that are planted one right after the other that are different botanically. They don't take the same demands on the soil for nutrients as one another, and they don't share the same pests or diseases. Well, lo and behold, like most plants in the same family either have similar nutrient demands or share a lot of the same insects and pests. So it's really easy to just, which crops belong to which families, to then use that as part of your planning for your crop rotation over time. Our current crop rotation plan, this is what it says on my my SOP for my organic certification, is that we're not going to plant the same crops from the same family back to back in the same season or from year to year. It's that simple. I don't have like a big elaborate 11 or 12 year rotation anymore. I just say, okay, last year I had lettuce here. That's part of the composite family. Next year I'm going to plant something that's not in the composite family, or after I pull that crop out as we go through the season. So jumping in to the alliums, this is the family that includes your onions, your scallions, leeks, shallots, your chives, and garlic chives, and garlic. Onions. Well, onions typically, if you're going to do start seedlings, I like to put 3 to 5 seeds per cell or per soil block. And then one option would be to either transplant those out 12 inches apart and not divide them, or to divide them and put them each, 3 to 6 inches apart in the row or in the bed. Other options that you have for onions would be to, instead of starting them for transplants, would be to buy onion sets. Onion sets are plants that are basically a couple months old from the previous year that have been grown so that they're a little bit baby bulbs that you can then plant out. The challenge that I've had with sets is that sometimes they will decide like, hey, I'm a biennial, it's my 2nd year, let's throw up a flower head and try to put some of that energy into flowers. If that happens, you can actually just cut it off like you would cut off a garlic scape. You cut it off at there and you can actually sell it or eat it or use it however you like. And then it'll put more of that energy into the bulb, producing the bulb and not the flower or the seeds. Shallots. Shallots are really similar to onions in that they're either grown from seeds or sets. They tend to be milder than onions, used in a lot of French cooking. They're a much higher value crop than onions. You can, when at the farmer's market, if I can charge 50 cents for an onion, I can charge $1 for a shallot. They just have that sort of connotation. The seed is more expensive, so I guess it's probably worth charging more for it. But they're just a really great crop that's been a really pretty easy one to grow that I really like. Scallions or green onions. These are pretty fast. I would say that you can probably get a crop of scallions in about 10 weeks. Typically, I plant them 10 to 12 seeds per cell and then transplant them out in that bunch of 10 to 12 seeds. And then they will, when I go to harvest them, I can just harvest them and they're already in the bunches, which is really nice. They don't get real big. They're pretty easy to grow as well. Leeks. Leeks are, again, you want to start those nice and early. You want them to be, boy, John Jeevan talks about how he wants his leeks to be like a pencil. I can never get mine that big, even when I start them in the middle of February. But you want them to be, start them early, middle of February. Same with your onions and your shallots. They're typically easiest to transplant into rows that are, 1 to 3 rows that are 3 inches apart, I find. And I find that they also require hilling to get that long white part of the leek. So what I often do is I'll dig a trench that's maybe a shovel deep, or if I've got a tractor and I can, the same trench that you dig for your potatoes, I dig for the leeks and then plant the leeks at the bottom of the trench. And then as they grow, you can kind of just fill in that trench with the soil that you've taken out of this trench, and that will give them that long hilling that gives them the long white part that is the part that's desired for leeks. Garlic. Garlic is planted in October, typically here in Minnesota. Typically you want to plant it in October, mulch it with straw after you've planted it. It's really easy to save the seed from garlic from year to year. You basically just pick the biggest, best heads from your previous harvest, save those and plant them in October. Typically they want to cure for about 3 weeks before you have them for storage or before you sell them, so that they will store well. And that typically just means, pulling them out of the ground, letting them sit in a cool, dry space for about 3 weeks. Green garlic is the garlic plants that are, smaller, coming from smaller cloves that you would harvest earlier in the season. And the garlic scapes are the flowering tip of the garlic plant. The picture there of the garlic scape, where you can see it's got 2 loops, that's about the perfect stage to harvest them at. If you wait much longer than that, it's going to start to get woody and straighten out, and then it's typically a little bit too far gone, versus if you do it before that, then you're not getting as much bang for your buck out of your garlic scapes. So things to consider. Chives and garlic chives are, they're perennial, they're herbs. They're one of the very first crops of the season that you can harvest. I can usually get a harvest of the garlic, or just the regular chives, in April. Again, they're easy to save seed from as well. And what I like to do is have staggered cuttings for a continuous harvest throughout the whole season. So I might start harvesting them in April and then, let them regrow, let one patch, regrow, and just kind of go down the line and harvest them as I go. And then you can have almost a continuous harvest of those without too many gaps throughout the season. Scallions, things to know about them. They needed to be started early. They're fairly cold tolerant. A lot of them, if you forget to harvest them in the fall, they will still be there in the spring, which is really nice. The chives and garlic are considered kind of perennial. They're pretty light feeders. They can be mulched with straw. They are not real weed competitive. And I've found that onions and shallots can grow really well in a polypropylene weed block landscaping fabric. So this is a picture where I just have the holes about 6 inches apart that I've either burned or cut, and then I plant the individual seedlings into there, and it just works really great. The fabric that I have now is probably going to be about 5 years old, and I think it's going to go another 5, if not 15 more years, and just works really great to sort of minimize the weeding that's required for each bulb. This shows you what it looks like. This is like planted them in the polypropylene landscaping fabric. They look beautiful. I got clover pathways in between all my beds. And then the same year I decided, I have this other spot. I ran under the fabric. I'll just put them out there. You can kind of see some onions in the weeds, but man, it's just so much more work. It's so much harder to get a good harvest if you don't control the weeds. And using that fabric works really well. It's about 9-10 cents a square foot. You want to make sure that you're getting the fabric that is heavy-duty greenhouse fabric, not the stuff you can get at Menards in the spring that's like paper thin and just breaks down within one season. You want the woven heavy-duty stuff. I just want to check in. We've gone through one family, on to the Humble family, but before that is, am I talking too fast? I get excited and I talk fast, so hopefully I'm not talking too fast. Everybody's still with us. Nobody's typing in their chat box, so I think we're probably doing good. Okay. Feel free to stop if I'm going too fast, or to slow me down. So the umbel family is your, there's herbs and there's carrot crops, or vegetable crops in this family. So a lot of the root crops: carrots, celery, parsnips, Fennel. Celeriac is another one that's in this family. Anise, caraway, chervil, cilantro, coriander, dill, and parsley are all in the umbel family. And these are typically crops that are direct seeded. They're light feeders. And typically the root crops are not mulched. You could easily mulch the herbs. I find that if you mulch the root crops, the mulch just gets in the way of harvesting them. So starting with the carrots, they are easiest to direct seed. And thanks for the notes there, guys. They're easiest to direct seed. They are really a great companion to radishes, in that if you plant the radishes and the carrot seeds at the same time, the radishes will kind of mark your rows, which is kind of nice. There you can see I have a picture of a board that I constructed a while back where I have like each hole is about 3 inches apart, and the idea is you drop a radish seed and a carrot seed in the hole, and then you pick that up and then just put a light layer of soil on top, and then you have really nice spacing. You do sometimes have to thin the carrots if you don't meticulously plant them. That's a pretty labor-intensive way to plant carrots, but I'm a little space obsessed sometimes, so we've tried that more than once and got pretty good results with it as well. Parsnips, it's really, really important. They're basically a lot like carrots in that you're planting them, they're growing, they grow for a pretty long time. I tend to find that parsnips are nice to plant kind of after the peas are done in June. If you plant them in middle of June, they tend to have just enough time to get big, but not so huge that they're too big. It's really important when you're planting, when you're going to harvest and weed around parsnips that you wear gloves. They have a oil in their leaves that you don't want to get on your skin. It can actually blister and cause a lot of bad reactions. So wearing gloves is really important. That's why you never see parsnips with their tops on at the market, if you've wondered about that. Celery, celery root, celeriac. These are ones that I've heard need really sandy soil, so if you're up on the sand plain, they may grow really well for you. But I've also had some experience growing them and I don't have real sandy soil, and it worked fairly well. They do need lots of water. That would be the one thing that I've noticed about them. In order to get a really good stand and a really good harvestable crop, they need really, really regular, almost constant watering. So consider that. Fennel is another one that's in this family. I think it's really pretty easy to grow. I would recommend looking for the Florence or the bulb types. There's a bronze common type and common types that don't give you that nice big bulb. They just produce lots of leafy matter, which is fine if that's all you want. But a lot of times people want the bulbs. It can be direct seeded or transplanted. And that picture there is the Swallowtail Caterpillar, which you'll often find on members of this family. And honestly, I've never seen them do devastating amounts of damage to anything, so a lot of times I just let them. I figure I love swallowtail butterflies. If it's an all-you-can-eat swallowtail butterfly buffet, that's just fine with me. Yeah. Other herbs that are in this family, parsley, cilantro, and dill. I find that parsley, all of them tend to transplant really well. But the dill and the cilantro are really quick to bolt. They're really quick to throw up a shooting stalk. And once they bolt, they just don't taste quite the same. The coriander, the cilantro actually turns into coriander. The coriander is what you call the seeds of the cilantro. So that's kind of a fun crop to grow, and that it's dual purpose. Multiple plantings are definitely needed of cilantro and dill. You could probably plant them about once every 3 weeks to really get a good harvest, continual harvest throughout the whole season of those. Chervil, caraway, and anise are also in this family. I haven't had too much experience growing those, but they're also in the same family. So, composite family crops. These are your lettuces, endive, radicchio, chicory, artichokes, and then lots of flowers, bachelor buttons, calendula, chamomile, cosmos, sunflowers, marigolds, and zinnias, and a ton more flowers. Anything that has that kind of daisy-like flower is going to be in this family. So you've got vegetable crops, you've got flowers. For the most part, these are moderate feeders. They're not going to be real heavy feeders. Typically, you don't want to mulch any of the greens just because it makes the harvest way more difficult. And the flowers can be mulched really easily. Oops. Let's go back here. Lettuce can be direct seeded or transplanted. There's a whole lot of diversity in lettuce. They tend to be pretty quick growing crops. And I find that if you're going to pre-bag them for like a farmer's market, that using clear bags works a lot better than using some of the more translucent bags. I had these like really great biodegradable bags that had this like kind of green tinge to them, and I'd put my lettuce in them and it just wouldn't sell. People like want to be able to see the lettuce for some reason. It's kind of silly, but that's the way it is. Harvesting greens, you have a couple different options in terms of using different knives and different harvesters. I'm going to jump over to our to YouTube because I think there's some good options out there. Let's see, let's go with the knives first. We'll start low tech and we'll get more and more progressively fancy here as we go.
Used in the field and for food processing. Tell me about this. We have a few different groups. That's the harvest machetes. They're really good for reaching in long. You don't have to bend over. They're really great for harvesting in the field. The 12-inch harvest machete is great for cutting crops like radishes. The 10-inch works great as well. Many of our harvest machetes can also be used to trim things in the field, like this broccoli stalk. These are our field and produce knives. The broccoli floret knife removes a step by allowing you to make florets directly in the field. These are our serrated greens harvesters. You can use it to cut parsley. Right now I'm going to use it to cut carrots. If you hold the carrot like it's in the ground, come along. These are our shears. They're lamb shear style. They're really great for topping root vegetables. These are grape and tomato cluster tools. Dave, when you want to plant your potatoes, use this potato seed knife. Cut it off, and you can plant that. So just plant the eye. Yep, you get new potatoes. Right. And we also offer sheaths for some of these in leather and nylon. So some great tools. Snip away. Get any of these in the Johnny's catalog?
I'm actually a really big fan of that serrated knife. It makes harvesting a lot of greens really fast and a lot of herbs really fast. Like you can just kind of grab them, swing it past and it's cut. It's been a really great tool to try. If you haven't tried the serrated one, I would definitely try that one. Let's go to another one here. This is looking at harvesting salad greens.
We'll harvest some of this lettuce here we've got in the trial garden. We are. We're going to use a greens harvester. Very nice, simple little tool. Just move it back and forth and cuts all the greens and put it right in your bucket. So this saves bending over, having to pick each leaf. Right. So this is it harvests absolutely everything on one quick, easy motion. And is it good for head lettuce and leaf lettuce? It's better for leaf lettuce. The heads will just kind of roll around and the leaf will pile up in the basket. Like if you had mesclun mix or something like that, or salad greens, any kind of the Asian greens you do as a baby leaf. Yeah, terrific, terrific. All right, well, show me how it works. Howard, tell me, what is this? This is pretty sharp. This is pretty sharp. This is a butcher's bandsaw blade that's been cut to fit on this tool. After you've cut a lot, I imagine you've got to sharpen it. We do, and we have a diamond hone file you use to sharpen this blade to keep sharp. It makes it like a nice hacksaw. Right. This is pretty cool. And, I've always told folks who watch Growing Wisdom, one of the things you want to do is keep things clean and sharp. You don't want to put this away dirty and always clean it off. This is a little bigger than one we've seen already. These come in a couple sizes. Come with 3 different sizes, depending on how wide your beds are. What's neat is that one person can do these 2 rows like that so quickly. Makes a nice clean cut. So Howard, thanks for showing us this, and this is on your website, right?
Okay, so that's one option. What I've found with that harvester, trying it over the years, is you have to have a really thick stand of leaf lettuce, and you need to have it be pretty much weed free. You don't want to have a lot of weeds in there because they're just going to get cut as you're cutting your lettuces. So this is the quick cut greens harvester if you want to get really high tech. And this thing, it's basically a similar model, except it's got a cordless drill that is running the little toggle bar of little fabric things that are turning it around, and so as you cut it, the blade is reciprocating and it's pushing all the greens into the basket. That again is another option if you're going to weigh up your production. I've heard you can harvest like 100 pounds an hour with that tool. Pretty cool. Fun toys to, I don't have one of those, but I've seen one and thought it was pretty cool and worth sharing with you. Interestingly, Johnny's makes all those interesting tools, but they also have a new salad mix that they're selling the seed for. That's the Salanova salad mix. There's basically two different mixes. There's the foundation mix and the premium mix. And what I found with this is you can grow all 8 of them, or even 4 of them, or 2 of them. And then what's cool about these is they're a multi-leaf head, so that when you harvest the whole head as a whole, put it through your washing processing, and then at the last step you can take and use the little tool that's, you can see the picture of there, to sort of break apart the core of the head, and then it turns into this beautiful leaf lettuce that has a ton of heft and weight to it that's really nice. I wish Johnny sponsored my work at NISA, but I just tend to find them to be a really good source for a lot of good information. So hence you you find that I give a lot of recommendations of their stuff. It's because they have the best tools. So Salanova works really great. I found it just has a really great, makes a really great leaf lettuce. It's got heft, it's got weight to it. It's good. I didn't have to grow it in the shade in the middle of summer. I just grew it out in the sun, and it still tasted great. It never got bitter. It never bolted on me. Anyway, I love Salanova, so check that out if you're interested. If you are interested in buying seed for it, it might be worth going in with a friend, because if you buy less than 1,000 seeds, it gets to be pretty spendy. Processing greens, I think that what I like to do with my greens is harvest them, wash them, and then after I've washed them, put them in mesh bags. And I actually have a washing machine that's just plugged in. It's not hooked up to water, but then I put the mesh bags in the washing machine and spin them around on a spin cycle for one setting. And then I find that that has just about the perfect moisture content to have them keep really well in plastic bags at market and in the refrigerator at home and all of that. Also in the composite family is Endive, Radicchio, and Chicory. These are more specialty greens. In order to get that like white endive, you actually need to grow it in the dark, which is kind of interesting. And you can do various different things to do that. I think the Belgian endive that we see, that's truly from Belgium, they like start the seeds, cut them, start the plants, get it growing, and then like cut off the top and go put it in the dark for like 6 months and then pull it out and harvest it. So it's kind of crazy. The frise and the curly types can be quick to rot and bolt. They can be a little bit more challenging to grow than some of the other ones, but it's another one that's in this family that is worth considering. Dandelion too, that's another one that you can often, it's a composite family crop that's worth out there harvesting too. Artichokes, you can grow artichokes in Minnesota. You need a lot of room. It's about a 4 by 4 foot plant minimum that they need. And they really need to have a cool period after they've germinated and started to grow to trick them into thinking that they've survived a winter and that they want to be a biennial and produce a flower bud. for you. So the trick to do that would be to, before we've even had that last frost, put the plants outside unprotected for a couple of nights, just to make sure that they get enough of that cold treatment to grow. I'm going to take one quick break and shut this door so that it doesn't get really loud. Hang on. Sorry about that. Okay. And what's interesting in a lot of the seed catalogs, it'll say northern climates with artichokes, that they're only going to produce, maybe one big flower bud and then maybe 3 to 4 other ones. I've had them produced 10, 12 in the course of the season. So they can be more productive than you'd think here in our northern climates if the weather decides to cooperate. Edible flowers. I really like growing edible flowers. You can put them in your salad mixes. You can sell them individually. If you have a market for them, it makes sense to grow them. They're so easy and they're fun. Bachelor buttons, calendula, chamomile, and marigolds are the main ones from this family that I like to grow. I also find that there are some good plants that are also cosmos, sunflowers, zinnias. They're really good beneficial insect habitat as well as being good cut flowers, so they can sort of be dual purpose. The edible flowers as well can be good for attracting the good insects that you want to have in your garden. Moving on to the Brassica family. This is your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, radish, rutabaga, turnips, arugula, collards, kale, mustard, and Asian greens. And sweet alyssum is also in this family. These typically tend to be your vegetables, roots, greens, so they're sort of divided into those categories. They're typically cool season crops. They're moderate to light feeders. If you transplant them, you're typically going to mulch them, and they can be planted in succession as well. They do tend to be susceptible to flea beetles, which can overwinter in your soil, so you definitely don't want to plant these family plant members back to back, and then cabbage, loopers, and all the different caterpillars that there's the diamondback moth, and there's a bunch of them. There's like 4 or 5 of them, I think, and they're kind of tend to be all susceptible to in the Brassica family. Cauliflower, broccoli, and Romanesco. These are usually transplanted, and you really don't want to let those transplants get root bound. Cauliflower seems to be the most difficult one of these. I feel like if you look at it wrong, it'll just sit there all summer and not produce anything until it cools off in the fall. So that's something to think about. Let it, if you don't get an early spring crop of it, let it just sit there if you have the space. And sometimes at the very, very end of the season, it'll start to make a head and produce something for you. Cauliflower, or the broccoli, the Romanesco tends to be more similar to the cauliflower. It's going to produce one head. The broccoli, however, if you let it produce one head, oftentimes you can harvest multiple side shoots off of it, which are really nice, and you can harvest those all season long. Look at the varieties. If you're going to do side shoots, some varieties are better for side shoots than others, and so you can kind of plan accordingly that way. Cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, these are all really easy to grow. Cabbages tend to be very cold tolerant. They all really are pretty cold tolerant. Brussels sprouts, they take a long time, but they're really best after the frost. The kohlrabi is a pretty quick one to grow. I like that one for taking to the farmer's market. Brussels sprouts, the trick to know about them is that right about Labor Day, you want to go out there and cut off that top big tip, the tip that's kind of that's growing on top of the very end of the stalk of the plant. You cut that off, and you can actually use that. It's like a big baby cabbage. I think they actually call it like a Brusselini or something silly like that, if you want to market it that way. But then what happens is all the little Brussels along the Brussels sprouts along the stem will actually ripen much more evenly and get much bigger than if you don't cut off that tip. So there, side by side, is what it looked like several weeks later of one that didn't get cut and one that did. Kale and collards, these are super easy. You plant them You can transplant them or you can direct seed them, and basically you can harvest them all summer long. Just, you know, basically breaking off the bottom leaves and letting the smaller leaves constantly getting bigger. Baby kale does need to get replanted to keep it small, but I've even heard of some dwarf baby varieties of kale that stay small, so that's something to check out. I'm going to definitely explore that this summer. Arugula, mustard greens, and Asian greens. These, again, they're easy to direct seed or transplant. They're easy to grow. You want to be aware of, you know, which varieties you're growing to match your needs or the needs of your market. And I do find that these tend to be more susceptible to flea beetles than some of the other varieties. I cannot grow arugula without putting a row cover on top of it to protect it from the flea beetles. They just really love arugula. And so I use an agribond or remay to cover up the plants. It just keeps the bugs out and gives me a better saleable crop than if I don't do that. Radishes, rutabagas, and turnips. These are usually directly seeded. I have transplanted the rutabagas and the turnips successfully, so that can be done. Radishes typically will split with uneven moisture as they approach a harvestable size. The rutabagas are also just really, they get really nice and big and are easy to grow. Turnips, for some reason I've had trouble marketing turnips. People want them in like October when my market's pretty much done. I've had really good luck with salad turnips. There's a bunch of different varieties of salad turnips that are out there. They're basically, you grow them to a little bit bigger than a ping pong ball size, and they can be eaten raw. The outside has a little bit of a spicy radish flavor to it, but if you peel that off, then it just has a nice mild cabbage flavor. And so that's something to consider as you're planning for next year. And there's also like red ones, white ones, yellow ones, all different colors, which are nice. The Goosefoot family, moving on to this family. If you haven't noticed, I like rainbow versions of everything. So we got rainbow beets and rainbow chard. We had rainbow carrots earlier. I just like the different options, the colors, and they just make it so much more fun to grow. So we'll be talking about beets, chard, and spinach here. These can all be direct seeded or transplanted, including the beets, believe it or not. They can be planted in successions. They're pretty cold tolerant, and they're sort of moderate to light feeders. Spinach and chard, here you can seed or transplant them. The spinach does tend to bolt in the heat. And, you know, I think the rainbow varieties are just so much prettier than just the plain red ones or just white or yellow. And it's kind of like kale and collards, where you basically can plant it and harvest it from the whole season as you go. With the spinach, I like to plant that almost when I'm planting my garlic in October, plant a bed of it, and then just let it be dormant over the winter. And then as soon as the snow is thawed and melted and the soil starts to warm up, that's usually when those seeds will sprout and start to grow. And then you get your sort of first possible harvest of spinach. That's usually really nice. Beets can be direct seeded or transplanted, easy to grow. I like to grow all the different colors just because they look so pretty and nice together. Cucurbit family. So here we're talking about melons, cucumbers, and squashes. Oops, that jumped fast or too quick. These are all things that really have a vining habit. Don't try to plant them in a 3-foot bed or a 4-foot bed. They really need wide beds. They like to sprawl a lot. We're talking like 6 to 8 feet between rows here. They're warm season crops. You want to wait until after June 1st or maybe even later if you're up north to plant them. They grow really well in the polypropylene landscaping fabric that the onions grew on. They tend to be heavy feeders. They are susceptible to powdery mildew, and typically it just kind of happens, usually end of August, beginning of September, the powdery mildew just kind of comes in. And usually by then the crops are, you know, they're established enough that it doesn't really make that much of a difference, so that's a good thing. They are susceptible to the squash bugs, squash borers, and cucumber beetles. I'm picking up some noise. If people could make sure they're muted, that would be helpful. Cucumbers, spines or without spines. The spines are those little prickly things that are on the cucumbers. So if you don't want those, you want to grow spineless cucumbers. They can be trellised, and they're typically planted in succession too, especially in more the southern regions. In the northern regions, I don't know that it really makes that much sense to plant them in successions. Our growing season just isn't that long, although some big growers do tend to plant them in successions. Melons, these can be easy to grow. They can be trellised if they're a smaller variety. I think that the hardest part with melons is knowing really when to harvest them. Muskmelons, typically the color that's under the nuts is going to turn yellow, and they kind of will slip or fall off the vine as you kind of tug on them. It's super helpful if you're looking at seed packets of melons. You want the varieties that slip. It just makes it so much easier to know when they're ready to harvest. The honeydews tend to get their skin will change from hairy to waxy when they're ripe, and you really want to smell the blossom end. That's another good indicator of ripeness. The watermelons, you can thump it. The surface color will be a little bit dull with the contrasting color of the stripes popping, and the underside where it's been resting on the ground will often get yellow. And I think it's important to think about size of these melons too. If you're just growing them for yourself, or if you're growing them for a market, like really huge watermelons can be difficult to sell. I've had really good luck with smaller varieties that are good for, 1 or 2 people over the course of a couple days to eat. Squashes, we've got winter squash, summer squash, zucchini, and pumpkins. There are a ton of different sizes and varieties that are out there to think about. They can be direct seeded or transplanted. If you're going to transplant them, you really don't want to touch their roots. The roots of any of the cucurbit family just are really susceptible to shock. And I had a poor student once who planted like a rows of cucumbers and then decided that for his research project he needed them moved over a foot and went back to transplant them or move them like a couple days later, and they pretty much all died because they were like, "You've touched our roots twice and that's too much." So don't touch the roots of the cucurbit family. Summer squash and zucchini, those need to be harvested like 2 to 5 times a week depending on what size you're going for. They can get really big really fast overnight when you're not looking. The thick skin varieties of squash and pumpkin can be cured for storage, and typically you're going to cure them in a similar fashion to how you're going to cure the garlic. You're basically just going to harvest them, let them sit in a cool, dry spot for a couple weeks, and then that skin will thicken up and they'll store better over the winter time. If you do find yourself with too much of zucchini, summer squash, or the winter squashes, you can always harvest the flowers. They are edible. And there are male and female flowers on most of these, so you can, the male ones will have a long stalk on it, and the female ones won't. So that's how you tell the difference between those two. And this again works well in the polypropylene landscaping fabric. The legume family, these are your bean crops, your soybeans, edamame, peanuts, peas, and then there's a bunch of cover crops that fall into this family too, the alfalfa, clover, vetch, and field peas. So these are usually direct seeded. They can be planted in succession. They can be heavy givers in terms of if you inoculate them, they can actually fix nitrogen and add that to the soil, which is great. And they can be mulched as well, although typically they're not usually mulched. Peas tend to be cool season, super easy to direct seed these. I really like to grow field peas for pea shoots as a really quick, 2-week turnaround crop. Have the field pea seeds soaking overnight, plant them. In about 10 days to 2 weeks, you've got a plant that's 4 to 6 inches tall, and you can just cut it off at the base and use it as almost like a microgreen crop, and works really well for that. It's kind of a tastes like peas, but has a leafy green texture. That's pretty delicious for early spring. And again, you can inoculate them to fix nitrogen. Beans, there's so much diversity in beans. You've got green beans, wax beans, dry beans, purple beans, lots and lots of different options. They're typically warm seasons, so you want to wait until after June 1st to plant those. And again, you can inoculate those to make them be heavy givers instead of feeders. Edamame and soybeans, they are warm season. Again, you want to wait till after June 1st to plant them. If you're going to grow them for the edamame, you typically want to look for the hairless varieties. They just are a little bit easier to eat as you're pulling the seeds out of the skins, but they're good. Cover crops, alfalfa, clover, vetch, field peas, these are all options. I really like to grow clover as my pathway between my beds. It just works really well. You can mow it anytime the weeds get taller than it, and it just works just so slick to have that as a sort of cover crop that you could walk on even when it's wet, and it's good for pollinators. I love clover. Nightshade family, this is one of my favorite families. So here we're going to talk about eggplants, ground cherries, peppers, tomatillos, tomatoes, and potatoes. These are all heavy feeders, so they need, they work really well actually to go after the legume family, in that they, would benefit from that nitrogen. They can be mulched. They're susceptible to Colorado potato beetles. That's something to keep in mind. They typically go after your potatoes and your eggplant first, and then they'll go after, I've seen them go after tomatillos and tomatoes after that, and then maybe peppers even after that if they are still there. That picture of that gross bucket is a bucket full of drowned Colorado potato beetles. So eggplants, typically you want to definitely transplant these guys. They just need that extra boost at the beginning of the season. I think it's really important to think about which varieties are going to meet your needs or for your market. There's lots of cool, interesting ones like long, skinny green ones and Turkish ones that look like little pumpkins and white ones and speckled ones. Typically, I find that people really like just the big black, purple varieties that are, your basic eggplant. So think about that. I see there's a bunch of questions about inoculating beans, so let's go back to that here. Since I jumped ahead too quick. So a lot of the inoculating, it's a product called garden inoculant oftentimes, and you can buy it specifically for peas or specifically for beans or the edamame, and typically it's a black powder. The garden inoculant usually is good for all three. So keep an eye on which variety of inoculant you're getting and what crops it's best for. But it's a black powder that you mix with water till it's like the consistency of a runny yogurt. And so then then what you do is you can soak your seeds in it overnight, or even just dredge them through that right before you plant them. And what it does is it just makes sure that inoculant is present in your soil. The inoculant, it's basically a rhizobacterium that's in the soil. Sometimes naturally occurring. It helps to add this inoculant because then you know it's there for your plants. And what happens is when this rhizobacterium is present, it'll actually form this symbiotic relationship with the roots of the plants from the legume family. And so then they will basically fix nitrogen. They'll pull nitrogen out of the air down at the root level. So then here's another example of why using that broad fork is really good, because that's going to add air into your pore spaces in the soil. It's not pulling nitrogen out of the air from the leaves, it's actually down in the soil, the air spaces down there. But basically it'll pull in nitrogen and then use it up in the leaves, in the fruit, in the roots, and it'll actually use, depending on what time you harvest it, if you harvest the peas, you're going to leave a little bit of that nitrogen in the soil. If you let's say you were to cut off a cover crop when it's at the stage of just about to flower or flowering, then you can incorporate that back into the soil, the roots and the leaves, and that's going to add more and more nitrogen to your soil as that breaks down. So hopefully that helps answer the questions about inoculation and what that means and what's involved in that, because it is pretty cool. Okay, we'll keep going here. Ground cherries. I don't know how familiar people are with ground cherries, but I love ground cherries. They are just one of the funnest crops you can grow. Typically, you transplant them, but they will self-seed from year to year if you allow them to drop. And typically, you think you've gotten them all, but there's still some that'll come back the next year, which kind of makes it fun. They basically grow in a little husk like a tomatillo, but they're much tinier. And they're just super delicious. They have kind of this citrusy, I don't know, they're almost hard to describe, but they're a little bit tomato-y, but not quite, a little bit nutty. I don't know, they kind of have a texture of like a fig because they have lots of little seeds inside. They're super tasty. So if you haven't grown them, you should grow them. If you can find a variety that's like a giant ground cherry, they actually make a bigger fruit, not as many of them, but it tastes like passion fruit. They're to die for. And they're pretty easy. They're kind of fun in that they have the sort of size of a pepper plant, but they have these little husked fruits that actually will drop off the plant when they are ready to harvest. So you kind of get to forage around and scavenge for them, which makes it kind of fun. Peppers, sweet peppers and hot peppers. Again, beware of which varieties are going to meet the needs of your market or for yourself if you're growing them for yourself. Some people like the really, really hot ones. Some people like the mild ones. I find at our markets I can grow cayennes, I can grow jalapenos, I can grow habaneros. But beyond that, people are just like, and poblanos, I guess, for the hot ones. But beyond that, people are like, I don't know. They're just not as adventurous about the hot peppers, I guess. The colored varieties of peppers for the sweet ones and the hot ones, they take longer to ripen. They'll start out green and typically go to whatever color they're going to be. And these, again, you're definitely going to want to transplant them. They just take long enough that they're a challenge. Tomatillos, similar to the other plants in this family, they will self-seed if you allow them to drop. In fact, they're almost hard to get rid of. From year to year. I actually have a dedicated bed that's just my tomatillo bed that's in with my perennials, and I just let them self-seed from year to year because I know that they're going to, and it's almost easier to just let them do that. And then I don't have to plant them or worry about trying to, grow new ones. I just let them come back from the seeds from the previous year. Tomatoes. I love tomatoes. I grew 80 varieties of tomatoes last year because I love every size, shape, color I can find. Most of them you're going to want to transplant. They will reseed from the last year, but they're not as likely to produce very much typically that I've found. There's a few, summer of 2012 when it was super hot, yeah, if they reseeded, they probably did produce quite a bit, but most years they don't get big enough to produce much by the end of the season, so you're better off pulling up the ones that reseed and transplanting new ones. Plus, you don't really know what those old ones are going to give you because it could be anything. A lot of them need trellising, especially the indeterminate types. The determinate types typically are going to be about 3 feet tall. They're still going to want to be trellised. But the indeterminate types can get basically 8 to 10 feet tall, or even taller if the season allows for it. There's every size, shape, color. The picture that I have here is kind of a picture of a Florida weave where you've got metal poles and bamboo poles in between them, and you're using a twine to go around in between each pole. And so that's one way to do it. There's lots of different ways to trellis. Typically, I've been doing a bamboo pole next to each plant and then using tomato clips to connect the plant to the bamboo support, and then running trellising twine in between about every 4th plant. I have a metal stake that goes around. This last year I tried using rebar mesh and just basically as the plant grew sort of weaving it in and out of the rebar mesh, and that worked really well. It was a lot less work than other options. So going forward, I will probably do more and more rebar mesh trellising as opposed to more bamboo stakes because it just works a lot better and is a lot easier. Potatoes, typically you want to plant seed potatoes. You can, get the ones out of the grocery store and just cut them up and have an eye per chunk, and that can work. But sometimes the potatoes in the grocery store are treated to not sprout. So you maybe want to make sure that they have sprouted before you test them if you're going to, before they, plant them out there. A lot of times they like to be hilled, and they'll produce more if they're hilled, and that's basically by the variety. Like Yukon Gold doesn't care if it's hilled, but a lot of the smaller fingerling types really like to be hilled. So that's where you dig a trench, plant the potatoes at the bottom of the trench, and then pretty much, by the time they're 4 inches tall, bury them 2 inches, and then when they get to be 6 inches tall, bury them another 3 inches, and you basically just keep burying them, and they will produce more potatoes by doing that. They can be really easy to save seed from your deer. You can just kind of throw them in the back of your cooler. They will sprout over the winter. You can knock off those sprouts like 3 times before it's going to be detrimental to the next plant, when you get to plant them. So keep that in mind. But yeah, potatoes can be pretty easy and fun. The mint family. This is most of the herbs belong to the mint family. So anise, hyssop, basil, catmint, hyssop, lemon balm, marjoram, mint, oregano, rosemary, sage, summer savory, tarragon, and thyme all belong to this family. And they're both annuals and perennials in this family. The catmint, that's for cats, not usually humans, although I do believe you can make a tea out of catmint. But you'd be surprised at how many people love to buy catmint for their cats at the farmer's market. So it's a good one to have at your market stand, and it's so easy to grow that there's really no reason not to. These are really great insectary plants in that they're going to host a lot of your beneficial insects. They're really great companions for a lot of other crops in that they can help them grow even better. They're usually transplanted. They're pretty light feeders, and they can be mulched as well. A few other families to think about would be, or crops to think about really, are the sweet potato, the sweet corn, and okra. Sweet corn or popcorn, this seems to be pretty densely planted for cross-pollination. They tend to be heavy feeders, and they are susceptible to corn borers. The sweet potato, this has a pretty vining habitat, so you want to plant these in pretty wide rows. I think I did them 5 feet apart in this year, and that worked pretty well. They're warm season, and they can be started from slips, which means basically you can take, you can either order slips, which I just got my catalog from the Sandhill Preservation Society in the mail today. And they're a place in Iowa that actually grows like 100 different varieties of sweet potatoes. You should check them out if you're interested. They're super old school. You can't call them, email them. They barely have a website. It's all like you write a check and send it in the mail and cross your fingers that you get your sweet potatoes. But the ones that I got from them last year were really great. You can order slips, or you can take and get a sweet potato from the store and bury it halfway in like sand and keep it moist, keep that sand moist, and what it'll do is it'll actually sprout a whole bunch of little baby plants, and then you can take and break those baby plants off and root them, and then when it's time to plant them out, and usually I wait till end of May, beginning of June to plant the sweet potatoes out, just because they really are warm season. You can transplant those little baby plants out, and then you'll have lots of plants. I think I got way too many plants last year of sweet potatoes because I ordered a bunch and then I wasn't sure if they were coming, so I tried starting my own, and that worked way better than I thought it would. So yeah, it's kind of fun to have lots of options for sweet potatoes. And there are different colors too. There's white ones and yellow ones and orange ones and purple ones. So check that out. Okra is a warm season crop. It's started from transplants. It's a heavy feeder. And you want to make sure you harvest it before it gets woody, because if they get big and woody, they don't taste very good. So that's something to consider. And then the last bit here is just thinking about other edible flowers. Borage, nasturtium, the violets, pansies, and violas, and snapdragons. These are all really good edible flowers. They're good insectary plants. They're good companions to other plants, and they are light feeders as well. This is a bunch of my favorite resources that I thought I would just share. The Sustainable Market Farming by Pam Dowling, that has some really great, it has like a chapter for each of the crop families that I've talked about tonight, and goes into lots of different crops in depth. The Market Gardener is my new favorite resource Bible that I'm reading through for about the third time, I think. It's a really, really good one that just came out about a year ago. The How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons, that's an old standby, as along with the New Organic Grower by Elliot Coleman. I also subscribe to the sort of spin farming, small plot intensive methods that are described in their books. And then there's a Minnesota Guide to Vegetable Gardening. That's a pretty good resource as well. And that is, I think I'm at the point where after I get a quick sip of water, we can open it up for questions.
This is Jim again, and we'll let Courtney take a little break and get something to drink. She's done a wonderful job, lots of great information. So please get ready if you have some questions. You can either enter them in the chat box, or if you want to ask them live, if you look for your name on the lower right hand side, if you just click where the little microphone is orange, if you click that, that will enable you to speak. And so go ahead. And one last reminder too, this session is being recorded. So if there were some things, she provided a great deal of information, wonderful information, many things that I was not aware of that she brought up today. So this was just wonderful. But it is recorded. So if you'd like, once we get that all edited and organized, it'll be available for anybody to watch. So with that, well, let's open it up to some questions.
I'm going to take a couple off the chat here quick while people are getting ready. There's one on how to prevent spinach and cilantro from bolting. Those are both, I think, determined by heat and temperature. So any way that you can keep them cool or keep them shaded, I think is going to prevent them from bolting, especially in the heat of the summer. The cilantro just bolts really fast. I think year round, it seems like to me. So it really wants to get to that next level of producing seed and flowers. So planting that one every 3 weeks, I think, is really crucial. Spinach, I think, yeah, the same thing. I typically don't even try to do spinach in August. I just stop it, mid-June and wait till end of August usually is when you can plant it, and by then it'll be cool enough into September and October to get some good harvesting off of it. A favorite sweet potato variety? Boy, there are a whole bunch of them, and I haven't grown them enough yet to have a favorite one. Last year I literally did the Sandhill Preservation Society. They basically have like we'll do a random assortment of ones for northern areas, and then I did a random assortment of colored ones, and that worked pretty well. So none of them didn't not work. So yeah. Questions?
This is Jim again. Just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, just unmute your mic on the right-hand side of your name on the lower right-hand side, and then you can go ahead and ask.
I had a question. And how many did you get? How did they do your sweet potatoes?
How many did I get, and what did they do? I would guess, they did pretty well last year. How many did we get? I bet you we had probably, I would bet we got probably 2 to 5 pounds per plant of sweet potatoes. Yeah. There's another question somebody had.
I had a quick question about the Hatfield Transplant tool that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Does that go through the black mold plastic?
The black plastic mulch, yes. It won't go through the woven polypropylene plastic, but it will go through regular plastic. Somebody's asking about what are the advantages of using the polypropylene landscaping fabric versus black plastic. I heard that for organic certification, farmers cannot reuse plastic mulch year after year. Do you know if the regular if the regulations for fabric are different. Yes, they are different. You can use the polypropylene landscaping fabric year after year. Typically, you know, that's not a problem. The black plastic it can't be reused, and that it doesn't hold up. It breaks down usually by the end of the first season and shreds, and so you have to get that out of your field for organic certification. There's another question. So advantages using the polypropylene landscaping fabric is that it is moist, that it lets the moisture through. So if it rains, the rain and the air can get down to the roots. Glass plastic, in terms of not being reusable, doesn't let the water go through when it rains. So you have to have drip irrigation underneath everything for that. So I put out the polypropylene landscaping fabric underneath my tomatoes, underneath my cucurbits, underneath my onions, and I typically don't put drip irrigation. I just let the rainwater fall and water them, and don't really, I guess the onions sometimes will put a sprinkler overhead on them, but that's all that I do there. So there's that advantage as well in terms of it being a little bit less labor intensive for watering. Yeah, they do, for the organic certification, they do want you to have the polypropylene landscaping fabric taken up at the end of the season and moved to a different spot. And I'm typically doing that with my crop rotation anyway, so I pick that up and move it to wherever I'm going to have that crop be the next year. I usually flip it from year to year so that I have the soil side down is up the next year, and it goes that way. Okay, other questions. Best time to start tomatoes inside in central Minnesota? With tomatoes, I find that I really like to have them be actively growing the whole time. And so I usually wait until almost middle to end of March to start them. If you're even farther north than the Twin Cities, you might even want to wait a week or two later, just so that they're actively growing that whole time. If they get too root bound in pots, they tend to sort of get stunted, and they'll just sit there, and then they'll wait even longer once they get out into the field. And so I find that it's better to just have them going, get them going and let them go, and keep actively growing in their pots as they go. Suggestions for newly starting gardener. Boy, plant some tomatoes, plant some peppers, pick one crop from each family and try them. I'd stay away from cauliflower just because it's so hard. But just about anything else that I've talked about tonight is pretty, not too terribly challenging and will be fun. How do you cure or preserve sweet potatoes? I find that they mildew or dry out quickly. I'm still working on trying to figure that one out myself. The way that I heard that you're supposed to do it is, again, a cool, dry space. Let them sit for a week or two to get that skin to harden up. And so that's what I would think about with those. I haven't consulted. There's a post-harvest handling book that I need to look that up in and see what it says about sweet potatoes. But parsley and parsnips, can they be overwintered? Yes. Parsley sometimes will overwinter itself, just all by itself without even mulching it, and it'll come back the next year, and you can usually harvest it till it bolts because it's a biennial. Parsnips, same thing. You want to harvest them pretty early so that they can be, they don't get too rubbery in the spring. Carrots, the same way. Can you give an example of plants that complement each other, and how close together do you plant them? My favorite example are beans and potatoes. The beans and potatoes, I plant them basically every other row, potatoes and beans, and then the beans will deter the Colorado potato beetles. We've done numerous experiments with this over time, and every year it seems to happen really well, that they just they'll sort of, I don't know, they mask them or they hide them from the Colorado potato beetles, so that's something to try. There's certain things you plant next to each other for pest deterring benefits. I just tend to have lots of things flowering everywhere to deter pests and to make sure that there's lots of habitat for good insects.
Do you have any suggestions on how to control squash beetles for cucumbers
squash beetles?
The squash bugs and the cucumber beetles, I haven't had too many problems with. There are some pheromone lure traps that you can use for the cucumber beetles that you might want to try. That's like a sticky trap with a pheromone inside that will collect them so that they don't multiply. The squash bugs and the squash borers, those I tend to do a lot of scouting for their eggs and getting the eggs off of the plant before the eggs hatch. The squash bugs, they're usually on the underside, they're coppery colored, they're pretty easy to find. I usually just kind of scrape them off and then put them in soapy water for about 24 hours before I dump them out, because then I know that that's got them good and dead. The squash borer eggs tend to be down at the base of the plant, right where the stem is coming out of the ground, and it's this little tawny brown mustard seed shaped egg. And that you might want to get out there with a magnifying glass because they're tiny, but I can scrape them off with my fingernail and they will, that eliminates them. And once they're no longer attached to the plant, they can't do any harm. What's the best way to extend the shelf life of lettuces? I tend to, bagging them when they have the right moisture. I really like that Salanova because you're not doing multiple cuttings of it. You're harvesting the whole plant at once, so you don't have little chunks of leaf that can rot and go bad in the bag. So that might be something worth trying. Look at that, sweet potatoes, 80-degree heat, furnace room for a week. But they still have trouble. Yeah, I don't know exactly what to tell you there. And does anybody else know why a tomato plant would turn purple when they're first transplanted? I think it's just a nutrient shock that they grow out of. You might want to try, what you could try is, what I do is I actually make mix up some fish emulsion, dilute it, and then I dunk the root of the plants into the bucket of fish emulsion before I put it in the ground. And that tends to help them with any transplant shock and nutrient deficiencies that they might get early on. Other questions?
When you said you used rebar for your tomato plants, what did you put the rebar on each side of the tomato plant, or I didn't understand that.
So it's rebar mesh. So it's the mesh that they put in between rebar. So it's a big steel panel that's got like a 6-inch by 6-inch grid. It comes in big rolls at like Menards or Home Depot. So I take and I unroll that and hold it up with stakes, and then you can just weave the plants in between that mesh grid, the metal grid.
So are you putting the mesh then in a straight row, or are you like serpenting it?
I'm putting the mesh in a straight row and I'm planting the plants at the base of it.
Yeah, Courtney?
Yeah.
Do you find there are less pests when you have garlic planted?
I don't know, I always plant garlic. So I've never done any tests to see without the garlic, but I have a 3-acre farm, and I don't necessarily find that the plants next to the garlic have less pests than the ones farther away from it. So I don't know.
Well, I noticed something. We used to have potato bugs, and since we planted garlic, we haven't had potato bugs.
The potato beetles have been a lot lighter the last several years.
Okay.
And the populations are just down. I don't know why. I don't know what happened, like if they burned out because 2009 they were like raining from the sky. But I would say the last 2-3 years I haven't seen barely any Colorado potato beetles either. So I think it's more some climactic thing or some, who knows what's going on. But I haven't seen many either. So I don't know if it correlates with your garlic or not. Hard to say.
So actually, companion planting doesn't have a lot to do with pests.
I think companion planting does have a lot, it can impact the pests. I mean, I find that I never have any of those brassica cabbage looper pests because I have so much beneficial insect habitat for parasitic wasps that those caterpillars are never really a problem for me. They never do enough damage to make it worth even really scouting for them or picking them off. And I totally attribute to the hoverflies and the parasitic wasps and all the good insects that I have going that are attracted to all those beneficial insects companion plantings.
Well, I've enjoyed your talk tonight.
Excellent, thanks.
Forward to seeing you next week.
Courtney, this session was originally scheduled for an hour and a half. So I don't know if we get cut off at 7:30. So if we go away, all of a sudden you'll understand why.
They said it was a little bit flexible. I think it's until we turn it off. So
okay, wonderful.
There's a question for what do you plant for the wasps, the parasitic wasps? And that I would say, any kind of plant with little itty bitty teeny tiny flowers. So all of those herbs are really good, especially the cilantro and the dill. The edible flowers, companion plants. So anything that has a little teeny tiny flower is good for parasitic wasps and beneficials and pollinators and all those good insects that you want to take care of those pests for you.
I've had good luck with borage and attracting those insects. Borage. But I also wanted to ask you, have you tried any of the hoop houses and what is your opinion on them?
Okay, the first question was about borage, and repeat that for me.
I was just saying that I've had very good luck with blue borage and attracting those insects. I generally have a buzzing garden, which is so much of that stuff. But I was wondering, with the hoop houses, have you done any, and what is your experience with them?
Yes, we have 2 hoop houses right now. We're looking to get a 3rd one that's on tracks this summer, hopefully. We've had really good luck. We're using them for season extension, essentially, and for getting, for using it in the early spring to grow a lot of cool season crops and greens. And then in the summer, growing a lot of the warm season, primarily nightshades and cucurbits, just to hold that heat in and warm it up faster to get more tomatoes and peppers and ground cherry. This year we actually tried a crazy experiment where we put ground cherries in hanging pots in the top of the high tunnel and then built a net to go underneath it so the ground cherries would drop into the net for harvesting really easily. And that worked okay. We have some modifications to make for this next year, but yeah, high tunnels can be great for extending your season and getting more growth in our cold climate.
How do you get the beneficial insects in the high tunnel?
You can, I mean, the sides are open, so, you can roll them up in the summertime and you can still have some of those same, crops in your high tunnel to get them in there. I find that the insects go where the flowers are. So this last year we actually had rosa peppers with clover pathways in between the rosa peppers in the high tunnel, and that worked pretty well. Ooh, somebody else is saying to use hog fencing egg panels instead of the rebar wire because it won't rust over time. And that they build an A-frame with 2x4s and stack 2 panels for indeterminate tomatoes. You can walk under, harvest, and prune from both sides. It's very flexible. You can make an arbor from which to grow other vining crops. It's a little spendy to start, but will last a very long time. So. Any last questions?
Well, if there are no further questions, I want to take this opportunity to thank Courtney. You did a wonderful job, and everybody's at home standing up and cheering for you because we can't hear the applause, I realize. But also want to thank Molly for her help in with the technology and keeping me on track to make this all work tonight. So again, it is recorded. So if there's something you'd like to see at some future time, you'll be getting an email on that in the near future. So we hope to see all of you next week again. And with that, I think we will sign off and say goodnight. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.